The water had been wrong for 3 weeks before anyone listened to Mara Voss. She had logged it 17 times. 17 entries in the station's biomonitoring system, each one flagged red, each one generating an automated acknowledgement from the Oceanic Survey Authority's central server on the mainland. 17 acknowledgements that amounted, in practical terms, to nothing at all. The dolphins had started avoiding the eastern lagoon on the 14th of March. By the 22nd, the tagged humpback pair, Lena and the old bull they called Dagger for the long white scar on his fluke, had simply vanished from the tracking grid. By the 1st of April, the bioluminescent bloom that normally lit at the shallows every evening had gone dark. But it was the silence that finally convinced Mara that something was genuinely wrong. Not the absence of data, the actual silence. The ocean farm on Yap Station had run for 11 years, and in those 11 years the water had always spoken, a layered language of clicks and whale song, and the soft percussion of tidal surge against the habitat domes. Standing at the observation rail on the upper platform of the main hub, you could close your eyes and read the health of the lagoon the way a doctor reads a pulse. Mara had been the station's senior biologist for 6 of those 11 years. She knew every voice in that water. On the morning of April 3rd, she stood at the rail with her coffee, going cold in her hand, and the lagoon was quiet in a way that made her chest tight. "You're catastrophizing again," said Dorian O'Cake from behind her. He was the station systems engineer, 26 years old, possessed of the particular confidence that comes from being very good at one thing, and not yet old enough to understand how many other things exist in the world. He was also, Mara had to admit, usually right about her tendency toward catastrophizing. She had once filed an emergency report over an unusual thermal gradient that turned out to be a malfunctioning sensor buoy. This was not that. "Come look at this," she said. He came and looked. The lagoon spread below them in the early morning light. A 3-kilometer arc of blue-green water, enclosed by the semi-circular habitat complex, and open to the Pacific on the eastern end through a gap in the reef. At this hour it should have been busy. The automated feeding drones running their routes, the research submersibles docked along the lower platform, being prepped for the morning dive, the surface disturbances of large marine life moving through the shallows toward the feeding stations. Nothing. The water was flat and dark and still. "Huh," said Dorian. "Yes, that's not right." "No." He leaned on the rail and squinted at the horizon. The Pacific sky was enormous and blue, and completely indifferent to both of them. "You've sent the reports? 17 of them. And I'm standing here talking to you instead of talking to someone who can actually authorize a deep survey." Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The new interns get here today." Mara turned to look at him. "Dr. Nakamura is sending 2 students from the Earth Sciences program at Meridian. Graduate level, both of them. High marks in marine biology and applied oceanography." He shrugged. "I figured we could use the extra hands for the equipment audit." "Dorian. But if you wanted to use them for something else, a deep survey requires authorization from. A deep survey requires a licensed operator and 2 qualified assistants," Dorian said, and now he was smiling in the careful way he smiled when he had already figured something out, and was waiting for you to catch up. "I'm a licensed operator. The students are qualified assistants if I sign off on their academic credentials, which I can do, because I'm also the station's credentialing officer." He paused. "I renewed that certification last month. Funny coincidence." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the empty lagoon. "When do they arrive?" she said. The transport from Meridian was a standard Pacific shuttle, battered in the comfortable way that meant it had been flying this route long enough to know every thermal and every storm pattern in the corridor. It put down on the station's landing pad at 10:14 in the morning, and the 2 students who climbed out of it looked like every graduate student Mara had ever supervised. Slightly too much gear, slightly too little sleeps, and that particular expression of careful enthusiasm that people wear when they're trying to seem more experienced than they are. The young man was tall and restless, with the kind of energy that expressed itself in constant small movements, adjusting his pack strap, cracking his knuckles, turning to look at everything at once. His name was Pav Garaskin. He shook Mara's hand with both of his and immediately started asking questions about the water temperature data she'd logged, which suggested either genuine interest or very good preparation, and she found herself hoping it was the former. The young woman was quieter and more still, which in Mara's experience was not the same as less attentive. Her name was Elise Venn. She had a narrow, serious face and pale gray eyes that moved over the station with an assessment that Mara recognized The same unconscious cataloging she did herself when she encountered a new environment. Elise looked at the lagoon from the landing pad, and whatever she saw there made her expression shift slightly, the way a signal shifts when something interferes with it. "The water," Elise said. "Yes," said Mara. "It's wrong, yes." Pav had stopped asking questions and was now looking at the lagoon too. "Define wrong," he said. "Quiet," Elise said. "It should be louder." Mara felt something loosen slightly in her chest. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you the data." The data took an hour to go through properly. Mara walked them through the 17 anomaly reports, the species disappearance logs, the thermal readings from the lagoon bed, and the passive sonar records from the last 3 weeks. Pav kept interrupting with questions, most of them good ones. Elise sat at the secondary console and pulled secondary data without being asked, cross-referencing the disappearance patterns against historical current models, checking the tidal records against the thermal anomalies, building a picture methodically and quietly while Pav talked. "There's something down there," Elise said eventually. The room went quiet. Even Pav stopped moving. "The whole pattern reads like territory," she continued, not looking up from the screen. "The disappearances aren't random. They follow the boundary of a defined exclusion zone. Something is pushing everything else out." She turned in her chair. "Has anyone done a bottom survey of the Eastern Quadrant recently?" "The last complete bottom survey was 14 months ago," Mara said. "What's the depth out there?" "The main channel runs to about 400 meters before it hits the continental shelf. But there's a wreck site at 280, a World War II transport that went down in the Pacific and drifted here on the currents. It's been on the charts for decades. Divers used it as a recreational site back when this was still open ocean." Elise looked at her steadily. "That's where I'd start." Dorian signed off on the dive credentials in 12 minutes. He then spent 40 minutes going over the bathyscaphe with Pav, who turned out to have more practical submersible experience than his transcript suggested. 2 seasons on a deep-water research vessel out of Auckland, which he mentioned only when directly asked, and which Mara filed away as another data point about the kind of person he was. The bathyscaphe was a workhorse model, not beautiful but dependable. 3 seats in a pressure hull the color of old bone, external lights that threw wide cones of cold blue-white into the dark, and a manipulator arm on the bow that could handle up to 200 kilograms of load. Dorian had it running at full diagnostics while Pav walked the exterior, and Elise reviewed the wreck charts on a tablet, tracing the outline of the sunken transport with one finger. "The Yamagiri Maru," she said, "Japanese cargo transport, sank in the Pacific in 1944 during a convoy action. The records say it was carrying industrial supplies and some secured cargo from occupied Burma. Nobody ever mounted a proper salvage operation. The depth and the legal complications around wartime wrecks made it not worth the effort." "What kind of secured cargo?" Pav asked, reading over her shoulder. "The records don't say. The Japanese military was thorough about some things and very vague about others." She set the tablet down. "It doesn't matter what it was carrying. What matters is what's living in it." Pav looked at the lagoon. In the afternoon light, it was very dark. "You think something is actually living in a wreck that's been down there for over a century?" "I think something is living down there," Elise said. "The wreck is just where I'd start looking." They went down at 1400. The descent took 22 minutes. The visibility was good in the upper water column. The kind of clear Pacific blue that makes the ocean look like a dream of itself, all light and movement, and the distant flicker of fish schools turning in unison. Then the light faded, and the color bled out of the world, and they were in the deep water, which is a different country entirely. Mara was in the center seat. She had done dozens of deep dives in her 11 years on Yap Station, and the descent never quite stopped affecting her. That moment, when the last of the surface light gave out, and the darkness became total, except for your own lights, and you understood in your body, not just your mind, how much pressure there was in all that black water above you. It was not fear exactly. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of something very large and being conscious of your own smallness. Elise, beside her, was utterly still, eyes moving between the depth gauge and the forward display, one hand resting loosely on the secondary controls. Pav on Mara's other side had gone quiet in a way that was new, the restless energy compressed into focus, his hands steady on the pilot controls. 250, he said, 260, picking up something on the sonar. The returns came back on the display as amber blurs, soft-edged and irregular. Not rock, not the clean geometries of manufactured debris, organic, large. "How large?" Elise said. "Hard to say. The returns are, they're overlapping. like a cluster. Give me the external cameras. The forward display split into 4 quadrants, the main light array showing empty dark water, the side cameras showing more dark, and then the downward camera caught something at the edge of its range. Mara leaned forward. The wreck of the Yamagiri Maru was down there, but it was not the wreck she remembered from the survey photographs. It had been covered, not by coral. Coral grew in specific patterns, built on calcite logic, and what she was seeing had no logic she recognized. The hull was draped in something organic and dark, a layered growth that clung to every surface in thick, irregular masses. It had the texture of something biological, something that had grown rather than accumulated, but she could not name it from this distance. The outline of the transport was still visible beneath, the ghost of a long hull, a broken superstructure, the collapsed remains of the forward crane. But it was wrapped now in whatever this was, embedded in it, as if the ocean had grown a new skin over the old wreck. "What is that?" Pav said. Neither Mara nor Elise answered immediately. The sonar returns were moving, not drifting. Moving with purpose, the amber blurs shifting and clustering and separating in patterns that, even filtered through the crude resolution of the instrument, suggested coordination. Suggested something deciding where to go and going there. "Take us down slow," Elise said. No sudden movements. At 280 meters they got their first clear visual. They were cephalopods. Mara's training identified the basic phylum before her conscious mind had fully processed what she was seeing. The body plan was unmistakable. The mantle and the arms and the chromatophore skin that flickered with rapid color changes in the light's glare. But everything else was wrong. The mantle was too long and the arms too few, 6 instead of 8 or 10, and each arm was heavily muscled, proportioned less like the delicate sensory and grasping limbs of a common octopus, and more like the legs of something that had learned to use its arms for locomotion. The eyes were too large, not just large for their body size, large in an absolute sense, broad and dark and deep-set in the mantle, arranged to give nearly 360 degrees of vision. And they moved on the hull of the wreck with a precision that was not the flowing, exploratory movement of cephalopod foraging. It was deliberate, patrolling. One of them stopped. Its eyes found the bathyscaphe in the dark. The chromatophores rippled, a fast, complex wave of color that moved from the tips of its arms up to the mantle and back again. "It's signaling," Elise said, very quietly. "To us?" Pav said. "To the others. There were many others." The sonar had understated it. The returns had been overlapping because they had been dense, not because the instrument was failing. The wreck was thick with them, layered in the growth along the hull, clustered in the dark breaks of the broken superstructure, moving in loose groups along the sandy bottom around the ship. 40, 50, possibly more Mara, Elise said. The species that went extinct during the oil crisis of the 2050s, the deep-water octopods. What do we know about their cognitive profile? Mara's voice came out more steadily than she expected. Higher than common octopus. There were studies before the collapse. Behavior suggesting tool use. Some evidence of intergenerational communication. The assumption was that they were smarter than we realized, and we ran out of time to find out how much smarter. Because we killed them all. Because we killed them all.
Yes.
Except we didn't. Another one had stopped, then a third. They were gathering not with the speed of an alarm response. She'd seen alarm responses in cephalopods, the inkjet scatter and flight, but with the measured pace of something that was not afraid of the vehicle in its water and was deciding what to do about it. "We should surface," Pav said. "Not yet," Elise said. "We're not being threatened. The sonar says there are 50 of something out there that we know nothing about. The sonar says there are 50 of something that are choosing not to attack us. That is important information. We should stay long enough to get more of it." Pav looked at Mara. Mara looked at the forward camera. The one that had first stopped was still watching them. Its chromatophores were doing something slow and complex now. Not the rapid signal burst of before, but a pattern that repeated with variations. And something about the repetition with variations set off a recognition in Mara's mind that she didn't fully understand until Elise said it first. "It's trying to communicate." They stayed for 48 minutes. Mara recorded everything. Every color pattern, every movement sequence, every configuration of arms and body posture, while Elise cataloged and Pav flew the bathyscaphe in slow, deliberate arcs that kept them visible without approaching the wreck. At some point, the creatures, she had started thinking of them, helplessly, as the residents stopped patrolling and started watching. The group that had gathered near the bow of the Yamagiri Maru held position and watched the submersible with the large, dark eyes. and the color patterns ran across them in slow waves that sometimes synchronized between individuals and sometimes split into different variations that played off each other like voices in a conversation. "They're talking to each other about us," Pav said. "Yes," Elise said. "That's extraordinary." "Yes, that's terrifying. Those are not mutually exclusive." When they finally went up, the ascent felt different from the descent. On the way down, Mara had felt the enormousness of the deep water above them. On the way back up, she felt something she had not expected, a reluctance to leave. As if something important was happening down there, something that was just beginning, and going back to the surface meant stepping away from it. She looked at Elise. Elise was watching the depth gauge with an expression that was very controlled and very focused, and Mara had been reading people's faces long enough to see the thing underneath the control. That Elise felt it too. That particular alertness of a scientist who has just seen something that rearranges the world. "We have to tell Dorian," Mara said. "Yes. And file a formal report with the Oceanic Survey Authority, yes. Though they'll want confirmation, and confirmation means going back down." "I know." The surface light found them at 60 meters, and the blue crept back into the world, and Mara found herself holding her breath without knowing she'd started. Dorian listened to the recording for 45 minutes without saying anything. Then he said, "We need to tell someone." "That's what I said," Mara told him. "Someone who can help us figure out what to say." He scrubbed back through the footage to the moment when the first creature had stopped and fixed its eyes on the camera. He watched it 3 times. "Because if we say the wrong thing, they'll send a containment team," Elise said from the doorway. She had changed out of her dive suit and was holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which she gave to Mara without being asked. "Standard protocol for an undocumented deepwater species population showing potential sapient behavior. Containment, study, possible relocation." "Relocation to where?" Pav said. "A controlled marine environment, somewhere that can be monitored." "That's a tank," Pav said. "You're describing a tank." "I'm describing a protocol," Elise said quietly. "I'm not endorsing it." Mara looked at the footage still playing on Dorian's screen, the color patterns, the synchronized waves moving through the group, the patient-watching eyes. She thought about the dolphin pair that had vanished, the bioluminescent bloom gone dark, the 17 reports that nobody had answered. She thought about how long those creatures had been down there, in the dark of the wreck, invisible to everyone, surviving in the deep water of the lagoon while the century above them burned through its resources, and made and broke its treaties, and forgot what it had destroyed. She thought about the oil crisis, the mass extinction assessments from the 20s and 30s, the great dying that everyone in her field knew about, and almost nobody outside her field thought about on a daily basis, because thinking about it on a daily basis was not compatible with functioning, except they hadn't all died. Something had persisted, something had gone deep and gone dark and waited. "We do this carefully," she said. The others looked at her. "We don't file a standard report. Not yet. We document everything we have. We build the fullest possible scientific record, and then we figure out who to tell and how to tell them so that the first response is not a containment order." She set down her coffee. "Because if it is, if the first people who know about this are the ones who think in terms of containment, then we will have found a miracle and handed it to the wrong people, and I am not willing to do that." The second dive was Elise's idea, and it went badly almost immediately. Not because of the creatures. Because of the wreck. The Yamagiri Maru's main cargo hold had partially collapsed at some point in the past, decades ago, judging by the encrustation of the debris, and the collapse had shifted the aft section of the hull, pinning part of the collapsed superstructure against the seabed and creating a kind of enclosed space in the ship's middle section. It was into this space that Pav, trying to get a better angle on the color pattern activity they were observing, edged the bathyscape's bow. He got his better angle. He also got the manipulator arm caught under a projecting spar of hull plating. "Back up," Mara said. "I am backing up." The thrusters hummed and the submersible strained and the manipulator arm did not come free. Pav cut the thruster power and tried again at a different angle. The arm moved, but the spar moved with it. A section of hull plating that had been balanced on debris, which now shifted, and something above them in the wreck groaned in the register of a sound that Mara felt in her teeth. "Stop," Elise said. Pav stopped. Something settled. The groaning faded. The manipulator arm was caught at an angle that made it impossible to release from the control panel. The mechanism that would allow it to detach required line of sight to the mounting point, which the collapsed plating had blocked. They were not in danger of their lives. The hull was intact, the pressure was stable, the oxygen recycler was running fine. They could call for a rescue dive, and Dorian would send one, and within 2 hours they would be free and back on the surface drinking bad coffee and filing reports. But for those 2 hours, they were not going anywhere. And the residents of the Yamagiri Maru had noticed. The first one came within 10 minutes of the arm getting stuck. It moved along the bottom with that distinctive, deliberate locomotion, arms working in a flowing, almost rippling pattern across the sand, and stopped 3 meters from the bathyscaphe's bow. It was large, larger than the ones they'd observed on the first dive, the mantle nearly a meter long, the arms thick with muscle. Its chromatophores ran through a sequence that Elise had started tagging in her notes as Pattern 7. The slow wave that propagated from arms to mantle and back, with a pause at the midpoint that consistently correlated with close-range observation behavior. It was looking at them the way Elise looked at data. "Don't activate the thrusters," Elise said. "I know," Pav said. "Don't activate anything. Don't change the light configuration." "I know, Elise. I know." There was no sharpness in it, just acknowledgement. He had his hands flat on the console, away from the controls, and he was breathing with a deliberate hits that Mara recognized as the technique they'd been taught in the emergency protocols briefing. When trapped, conserve oxygen, stay calm, don't make things worse. 2 more came, then 4. They arranged themselves around the bathyscaphe in a loose arc, not blocking. There was clear water on 3 sides, but present watching. "They know we're caught," Mara said. "Yes," Elise said. "What are they going to do about it?" Elise said nothing. She had her face close to the forward display, watching the Pattern 7 sequence ripple through the assembled group, in something that was almost, not quite, but almost, synchronized. Like a conversation conducted in light, where multiple people are speaking at once and somehow not on each other. Then the large one moved. It came forward slowly. It stopped at the bow of the bathyscaphe, directly in front of the forward camera, close enough that Mara could see the individual chromatophore cells shifting in its skin. Its eyes, those enormous, dark, utterly alien eyes, looked directly into the camera lens. Not at the light, not at the hull, at the lens, at them. The color pattern it ran then was not Pattern 7. It was not anything from Elise's catalog. It moved in a single slow wave from the base of the mantle to the tips of the arms, and then it held. A color that Mara didn't have a word for, not exactly brown and not exactly amber, the color of old honey or of certain stones after rain, held it for exactly 7 seconds. Then it reached out with the tip of one arm and touched the manipulator arm's mounting point, delicately, precisely, at the exact location where the mechanism was jammed. It moved its arm along the connection, and the touch was not exploratory. It was the touch of something that already knew what it was touching and was deciding what to do about it. "It knows what the problem is," Pav said. His voice was very quiet. "Yes," Elise said. The large one withdrew its arm and moved back. It ran a different pattern, short, rapid, asymmetric, and 2 of the others moved forward. They went to the spar of hull plating that had the arm caught, and they worked at it with the methodical patience of engineers, testing the load distribution, finding the points of leverage, trying one position and then another. One of them communicated something to the other, a fast ripple of color, like a sentence. And they adjusted, and tried again, and the plating did with a sound like a held breath releasing. The manipulator arm came free. Pav looked at his hands. He looked at the forward display. He looked at Mara. "Don't move yet," Elise said. The large one had come forward again. It was running the amber honey pattern again, slower this time, with a kind of deliberateness that felt. Mara understood she was projecting. She knew she was projecting. She could not stop. Like emphasis. Elise reached past Pav and pulled up the external speaker system. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you." Her voice went out into the dark water. The large one's chromatophores ran a fast, complex burst, not Pattern 7, not the amber, something new, and then settled back into the slow amber wave. The debrief took 6 hours. Mara and Elise and Pav and Dorian sat in the main lab with the recording running on loop and the data spread across 3 screens, and nobody said anything that wasn't based on what they could actually prove, which was a population of deep-water cephalopods of unknown species, displaying behavioral patterns consistent with high-order cognition, had freed a trapped research submersible from debris entrapment through coordinated problem-solving. That was what they could prove. What they believed. What all 4 of them believed, sitting in that room with the footage on loop, was something much larger than what they could prove. And the distance between the two was where the real problem lived. We have to be careful about what we claim, Elise said. We have footage, Pav said. We have footage of a behavior. The interpretation of the behavior is where people will fight us. They freed us. On purpose. After clearly assessing the problem. Yes. And someone will say, it was opportunistic mechanical interaction. Someone will say the manipulator arm was in the way and they moved it. Someone will write a paper about how we're anthropomorphizing a cephalopod stress response. She paused. Someone will always say that. We need enough data that the someone can't win. How much data is enough? Elise looked at the screen. The large one was running the amber pattern, 7 seconds hold. I don't know, she said, but more than we have. They spent 3 more weeks on the station. Dorian filed the dive logs in a way that was technically complete and technically opaque. The language of bureaucracy used as camouflage, a skill Mara suspected he had acquired through long practice. The OSE server generated its acknowledgments. No containment teams appeared on the horizon. They went down every other day. Elise cataloged patterns. Pav flew the submersible with increasing precision, learning the geometry of the wreck by heart, which passages were clear, which were unstable, where the residents gathered, and where they didn't. Mara recorded everything with a care she had not applied to scientific observation since her doctoral work, when she had still believed that the specific attention you paid to a thing was a form of respect for it. The large one, Pav called it the Elder, and the name stuck, came to the forward camera on the 3rd dive, and the 5th, and the 7th. It ran its patterns. Elise cataloged. The amber honey held for 7 seconds, and released, held, and released. And Elise spent long hours in the evenings building a theoretical framework for what it might mean, and tearing the framework down and rebuilding it. Because the framework kept pointing toward the same conclusion, and she kept refusing to arrive at the conclusion until the evidence demanded it. On the 19th dive, Elise ran a pattern back. She had built a simple output system, nothing sophisticated, just a panel of lights on the bow of the bathyscaphe that she could sequence manually. She had spent 3 evenings practicing the amber color approximation and the 7-second hold, and on the 19th dive, she watched the Elder run its pattern, and then, when it finished, she ran it back. The Elder went completely still. Every chromatophore on its body stopped, the skin went flat and dark. Mara held her breath. Then slowly, with the weight of something very large and very old making a very deliberate choice, the Elder ran the pattern again. Not the same, a variation. The amber wave, the 7-second hold, but at the end a new sequence, a rapid asymmetric burst, color moving from right to left instead of left to right, held for 3 seconds. It's responding, Pav said. It's adding to it, Elise said. She ran the original pattern back, then the variation. Her hands were completely steady. The Elder ran another variation. They were there for 3 hours. When they surfaced, none of them spoke for a long time. Dorian was on the platform when they docked, and he looked at their faces and went to make coffee without asking any questions. The paper took 4 months to write, and another 3 months to get through peer review, which was faster than Mara had expected, and slower than she had hoped. The reviewers were, in the main, careful and serious people who asked hard questions and got hard answers and came back with harder questions. The data held. The interpretation was contested, as Elise had predicted, but the data held. The final version ran to 63 pages of text and another 40 pages of supplementary material. It did not claim sapience. It claimed high-order cognition, evidence of intergenerational knowledge transfer, and documented instances of cooperative problem-solving in response to novel stimuli. It presented the color pattern exchange sequences in full and offered 3 possible interpretive frameworks, of which the most conservative still implied a level of cognitive complexity that had no precedent in the marine biology literature. Mara wrote the abstract. Elise wrote the methodology and results. Pav wrote the discussion, which was the hardest part, because the discussion was where you had to say what you actually thought, while pretending to be more cautious than you were. The cover letter to the journal was 1 paragraph. It ended, "We request, in the strongest possible terms, that immediate protective status be granted to the lagoon habitat and the surrounding continental shelf region pending full review of these findings. We further request that all personnel with knowledge of this location be bound by non-disclosure agreements pending the establishment of a formal research protocol. We are aware that this request is unusual. We submit that the situation is unusual." The journal's editor called Mara directly, which never happened. He said he'd read the paper twice and the supplementary material once, and he had a question that wasn't in the peer review. "How long?" he said. Mara knew what he was asking. We don't know. The oil crisis that was supposed to have killed them ended in the 1980s. If any population survived into the deep water before the final collapse, they've had 140 years of isolated development. 140 years. Yes, in the dark, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We'll expedite." The paper came out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday it had been picked up by 3 science feeds. By Thursday it was in the general press, and by Friday the Oceanic Survey Authority had placed the lagoon under emergency protective status, not the containment protocol, the preservation protocol. And 4 different universities had contacted Mara about collaborative research agreements. Elise was in the lab when Mara found her, running the footage from the 19th dive again. "You knew they'd move fast," Mara said. "I knew they'd move. I hoped they'd move in the right direction." Elise watched the Elder's amber pattern run its 7-second hold. "We got lucky. We were careful. Those are not mutually exclusive." A slight smile, the first real one Mara had seen from her since the first dive. "We were careful and we got lucky. It's usually both." Pav appeared in the doorway with 3 cups of coffee. He had apparently decided at some point to take over Dorian's role as the person who appeared with coffee when it was needed, which Mara found she didn't mind. "The OSA rep is here," he said. "She wants to talk about the research protocol. Tell her we'll be there in a minute." Mara looked at the screen one more time. The amber pattern, the hold, the release. Whatever it meant, whatever its precise content, whatever the Elder had been trying to say in that ancient and unhuman language, it felt to her, in the way that some data feels before you can articulate why, like the beginning of something. Not an answer, not even close to an answer, a first word. She picked up her coffee. "Let's go talk to her," she said. The formal research station opened 18 months later, in the space the old equipment bays had occupied. It had 3 dedicated submersibles, a pattern analysis system that Elise had designed in collaboration with a computational linguist from the University of Tokyo, and a rotating team of 6 researchers at any given time. The original team had all been offered permanent positions. Dorian stayed. Pav stayed, which surprised nobody who had watched him on those dives. The restless energy had found its subject, and subjects, once found, have a gravity of their own. Mara stayed too, though she had been offered 3 other positions at institutions, with more prestige and considerably better funding. When people asked her why she stayed, she gave practical answers: proximity to the data, continuity of the research relationship, the value of long-term observation. These were all true answers. They were not the complete answer. The complete answer was that she had stood on the observation platform on the morning of April 3rd and felt the wrongness of the silence. And then she had stood in a bathyscaphe at 280 meters and watched a creature who had survived a century of darkness choose to help rather than harm. And then she had heard, coming out of the external speaker into the cold black water, a human voice say thank you, and watched something ancient and alien and entirely real hold still in what might have been, what she believed was, recognition. She stayed because she had been there at the beginning. Because the beginning mattered. Because someone should be there who remembered what it had been like before. Before the paper, before the protocol. Before it became a story that people told in the way they told all stories of first contact. As if the outcome had been inevitable. As if it had always been going to end this way. It hadn't. It could have ended in containment, in tanks, in the cold machinery of official procedure. It had ended this way because a young biologist had filed 17 reports that nobody answered, and because a systems engineer had renewed his credentialing officer certification the previous month, and because 2 students had gotten off a battered shuttle and looked at a quiet lagoon and said, correctly, that it was wrong. It had ended this way because, when trapped in the dark at the bottom of the sea, a species that had every reason to distrust the creatures above them had reached out instead, had solved the problem, had spoken first. Mara thought about that sometimes, standing at the observation rail in the early morning with her coffee. The ocean spread below her, bright now with the returned life. The dolphins were back, the humpbacks tracked on the grid, the bioluminescent bloom lighting the shallows every evening in its patient, ancient rhythm. Down below, in the dark around the Yamagiri Maru, the Elder was running its patterns. They had not translated them yet. They might not fully translate them in Mara's lifetime. Language, real language, the kind built up over 140 years of isolation and darkness and whatever experiences those years had contained, was not a thing you decoded. It was a thing you learned, slowly, the way you learned anything real, by being present, by paying attention, by assuming that the other side of the conversation was worth the effort. She raised her coffee cup toward the water. An absurd gesture, a human gesture, she made it anyway.